We are recording this webinar and a link will be sent out in a few days to all of you. So with that, I am pleased to introduce our presenter, Scott Holter. Scott is the Director of Business Solutions with Meaden Moore. And Scott has a lot of information for us today, so we'll just jump right into it. Scott, the floor is yours.
Oh, great. Thank you. And thanks for everyone for braving the snow today, or at least getting up out of bed, out of a warm bed into a cold day. So hopefully, I'm going to presume that no one was here for Tuesday's webinar. There's not much, if any, overlap, but Tuesday's webinar was more about setting a framework and some of the ways that you can get more out of your existing forms of enterprise software. Most notably, we focus on ERP, but the principles apply to CRM or some of the point solutions used in maintenance or accounting or what have you. Today is more for those who throw up their hands, make the emotional and financial commitment to replace a foundational element of their enterprise software. And we start off with, why do we think that it's appropriate and important to take care in selecting new software? And part of the reason is that choosing a software vendor, provider, publisher is like selecting a spouse. It's designed to be a long-term partnership that is mutually beneficial. Software companies, as your supplier and partner, can help make you a better company. The other reason is that switching costs are high. It's gotten better in this era of subscribing to software rather than buying licenses. But nonetheless, just getting software purchased or subscribed to and up and running is a high fixed cost that not a lot of companies want to do more than once every 10 or 20 years. The other reason is there are many choices out there. They range from QuickBooks on the low end to SAP on the high end, and most of our industrial clients are somewhere in the middle. It tends to be the largest and riskiest IT investment that manufacturers and distributors will undertake. We believe fundamentally that one reason to take care in selecting the software is to maximize the fit so that you can avoid customization costs. It's not to say that all customization is bad, but if you have to customize software to provide features that other software alternatives would provide, you've wasted some money. It's the other measures or reasons for doing this. It can be a very educational process. Folks who are going to use a new system will become educated in a carefully architected evaluation and selection process. The other thing, especially these days, you want to gain employee buy-in. We have found with some clients very good to great software that is poorly used, and we found marginal software that is well used because of this second to last bullet. And then perhaps one of the most important elements is that a well-architected evaluation and selection program prepares the employees and the team for the rigors of the implementation. So we think that it's the old measure twice, cut once adage applies here. So why do we see companies buy new enterprise software? In many cases, we would recommend something, we might recommend therapy before endeavoring on this, because it is an intrusive and disruptive event. But certainly growth and expansion are one of the main reasons. We outgrow our old software, we expand overseas, we add plants, facilities, or conversely, a divestiture. We worked with a company that was a spinoff of Graphtec, formerly Union Carbide, that was using a big J.D. Edwards system. And after a spinoff, they were just a small $11 million precision machine shop where J.D. Edwards would have brought them to their knees, most likely. Some companies get version locked. They've heavily customized the software and can't go forward with it. And maybe the old versions become technologically obsolete or unable to fulfill their requirements. In addition, we'll find situations where obsolescence can take the form of the software is no longer supported by the provider. We have recently, especially last year, I don't mind naming names, but a number of our clients got letters from the former ShopTech, the new owners are ECI, letting them know that their ECI, ShopTech E2 Pro was no longer going to be supported. And so we have 3 clients right now that are asking us to help them search for alternatives or craft a go forward solution. In addition, sometimes the software is no longer viable, it lacks features, or the company changes its products, processes, services. For example, right now we're working with a company here in Cleveland that is a distributor, or let's say their history is as a distributor, but they went ahead and bought 3 of their suppliers that were machine shops. And now they've become as much a manufacturing company as they are a distributor. So a tenet of our advice to clients is that you want to know what you're buying. And we believe that some of the analysis that we're about to show you is important to garner during a process. And so I'm going to pull up a couple of sample deliverables. This is a top 10 list, if you're familiar with the old David Letterman show, for a small RV parts supplier that we provided for them. I'll blow it up a little bit here, but you can see that it might have some that are known to you, not known to you, with an overall percentage of fit. And as we drill down into the fits, we found that, for example, the one that ranked number 10 had barely a 50%, 55% fit in the area of quoting and order management, which is what brought them down, from the 90s to the 80s. And when we look at in marketing and Salesforce management, commonly known as CRM, which was not heavily valued by this client, only 2% of their decision criteria, we found that it offered no support there. And that was admittedly one kind of tiebreaker issue that caused this package to be knocked out of consideration. Further drilling down, we provide the client with fit at various levels. When it comes to IT, we'll look at deployment model, database. When it comes to marketing, how do they handle leads, utilities? When we get into quoting and estimating, and you can see right here, this client is a bit of a job shop with a heavy estimate requirement. And you can see a couple of packages had very low fits that were colored in red here. And all of that we roll up to show the client specifically where, for each of their requirements, do the packages fulfill that capability? And if they don't, put it in some sort of color coding so that it stands out, and you can see a bunch of not supported or an interfaced product, commonly called a bolt-on. Some of these software packages these days have enough bolt-ons that we'll call them Frankenstein software. You see some bolt-ons here that the client found unacceptable. So this company was a small, somewhat of a precision machine shop, machining of glass and mirrored products, not metals. But walking through their shop, if you're familiar with a machine shop, it looks very similar with saws and beveling and all kinds of things like that. Conversely, we did another project that was for a much bigger company that operates in 13 countries and makes chemicals for the biomedical industry. And notice we've got them labeled as a large global biomedical supplier. And they are actually one of the providers of reagents that are used in the COVID test kits. So they've been very busy in the last 2 years. Because of their footprint, the packages that rose to the top that provided that 90+% fit tended to be bigger, more complex, more expensive systems. But nonetheless, we provided them with the same levels of insights. Again, one here in color coding ones that come out to be a pretty low fit for them. In service management, this one failed to meet our 85% threshold. And all of those scores are rolled up from looking at some of the very important things that we see, all of each of these individual requirements, And the point of this exercise that companies, whether they work with our tools or do this on their own, will create some sort of spreadsheet where you're listing as your rows each of your must-haves and nice-to-haves, putting some sort of weight on it, and then evaluating, do the competing software contenders offer that capability or not? Much better to know what you're buying ahead of time rather than to find out after you've bought it that it doesn't do something and having to pay to have the software customized. So we believe these are important homeworks to do before you embark on buying new software. So the way we start our process is always with goals and objectives. Why are we here? Quick strategy and scoping discussion. Sometimes, especially if there's any smaller companies in attendance here today, I'll let you know that while these are big words, this is usually about a half a day exercise. So it's not anything that's going to produce a big 3-inch 3-ring binder with a bunch of useless documentation. After that, then we suggest getting into the detailed requirements. What are those specific things we want with respect to bills of material or purchasing or accounts receivable? Once you've defined what you're looking for, then we can begin the candidate research, and there's a number of ways to go about that. This helps you solve or identify some of the needed criteria for your decision, but the other competing objective is that cost consideration. There are systems out there that will do everything, including shine your shoes, but at what cost? And that's where some help in understanding the tiers and how the markets are structured, we can help, and there's a lot of online tools that can help you as well. And that's once you've gotten some budgetary things figured out, then we will show you step 6 is a candidate investigation and selection. And then the 7th is that transition from planning and selection to the actual doing of the work and the execution of the work. And so getting started, the goals, objectives, and strategic factors, we capture this in a tool that we call our ERP Navigator. There's no magic to it other than it happens to be in our own tool, but I'm just going to log in here and show you. We started up a project with a small company in Cincinnati last Thursday and Friday. And I asked them, and they said we could use some of their data. But we started off with a tour of their facility, and then we just talked about their organizational structure, who their customers and markets are, what their products are, their lead times, what their strategy is. This company happens to do aftermarket or after shipment service and repair of their equipment in the field. Mostly an assemble to order type of strategy. Talk about their purchases and raw materials, no regulatory bodies, but other than ISO. And then we'll get into the goals and objectives. We were able to identify a series of 9 objectives or 8 that they said were weak in, and procedural or process improvement definitely wanted to have eased the burden on engineering, manage their inventory levels more effectively, improve their handling of returned goods. So these are the type of statements. They're broad guidelines, principles, goals that we would be looking for this to justify the investment from. And then after that, we talked with them about what does ERP mean for them. And it's different for every company that we meet. And it's important to get the scope right so that you don't waste time and don't allow the vendors, magicians, otherwise known as the demo guys, to start showing you things that aren't relevant to your decision criteria. So for example, this particular client in Cincinnati was not interested in CRM. They're running Salesforce. They're happy with it. They want to keep it, interface it to their existing, to a new ERP system. So CRM was out of scope from a new purchase standpoint. Same thing from an asset management standpoint. They just aren't a capital intensive enough manufacturing process to warrant needing maintenance to do things like preventative maintenance or maintenance scheduling or anything like that. But unlike the majority of our clients, this company services their equipment in the field, and they actually generate nearly as much revenue from field service operations as they do from shipping of product. And so this ended up being a very large component of their decision criteria. Of course, we can't forget about accounting. This is typically required in scope for almost all of our clients, but there are occasions where it becomes more or less important depending on the attitude of the client. You'll see here, this client put more emphasis, 20 percentage points of its decision criteria than actually manufacturing, which it had 8% on. Notice here things like production scheduling for a classic machine shop, which is a driver, was not in scope for them at all, or had a very minimal weight on it. So that's what we mean by a scoping session, along with goals and objectives. The other thing that we do that we think is very important for you as a buyer to define up front are a number of what we call strategic criteria. Certainly the size of your company today and where you might be in the next 10 to 20 years. Today, you might be a $5 million company, but you've got great plans to get into the $10 to $50 million size. You might be buying tier 3 software vis-a-vis tier 4 software. From an industry standpoint, it's important to define not just what industries and manufacturing processing you take today. For example, this client was involved in capital equipment, was very high. So a lot of non-recurring capital equipment that's engineered to order. What your manufacturing strategies are. If there's anyone in the audience that's making chemicals or food and beverage, any kind of things that require a container or a vessel to hold, you might be process, batch, or continuous flow. The majority of companies, and therefore the majority of our clients, tend to be discrete parts manufacturers, either batch, kind of work order oriented, with some that are repetitive or project based. Other components, your supply chain strategy is important to define and the relative importance of it. And then we have another category that we call international strategies. How important is selling product internationally? For them, it was a medium requirement, but they're also doing some importing to their domestic sites, albeit a low one. And then we get into IT strategy. How important is it that you buy a leading technological platform, one that might be cloud or web-based, one that's customizable, one that allows external collaboration with tools such as EDI or e-commerce? Very low priority for this client. So as I said, these are important factors to define. They're guiding principles. For most of our clients, and I'll say at least half our clients, are single site, single company, single legal entity. This is a half a day exercise. So it's not a big to do. There's not a lot to go through, but it's very important to capture this information early on as possible. There's no right or wrong answers, but they will save time in subsequent steps. For example, it's good to know early on, what would you accept as a bolt-on, such as that client accepting a bolt-on CRM that they're going to bolt on themselves. Are you comfortable with more of a Windows-based on-premise solution or a web-based system? We're running into some clients that have ITAR requirements for aerospace and defense manufacturing that put some real constraints on what they can do with a software as a service that's hosted in the cloud. It also creates some limitations with respect to foreign software providers and foreign users. So that's it's important to define those things, set aside a half a day to a day to get and really crystallize the big picture. Once you've, any questions from there? So
we do not have any questions. Nope.
Okay, good, thanks. Once you get to that, that's when the nitty gritty begins. And that gets to, how do we want to run our business? How do we run it today? How might we like to run it in the future? and what does the software need to be able to provide in terms of capability and features to meet those business process requirements. So step 3 is to define a detailed requirements profile. Certainly when you're buying new software, replacing the current one, we think that's vital. We also suggest that that be done prior to an upgrade, an extension of current systems to other plants or related sister companies, or if you're simply doing an ISO type audit of your ERP system like we talked about on Tuesday. So what is the purpose? Well, if you're going through a replacement, which is what we're here today, it's to provide points that are going to help you differentiate between the competing vendors. For example, one of our Northwest Pennsylvania clients, we're comparing a couple of systems, and when it came to labeling, the current process and the preferred process is for the company to pre-print the labels that go on the boxes that are going to be filled with the parts they mold. One of the systems we learned during the presentation and their demo requires what we call line side labeling, which means the labels can only be printed as the box is filled and produced. And the client is, while the client likes this system overall as their number one choice for a new system, they're concerned that they might not be able to adapt for some very good reasons to line side printing of labels. They really prefer. So they're weighing, do we go with this software and request some customization, or do we adapt our business process? But regardless, how and when labels are printed was a point where we were able to find differentiation among the competing alternatives. For their business, very important. For others, maybe not so much. So how do you go about defining your wish list? One of the things we would suggest to everyone is don't start with a blank sheet of paper. There are plenty of ERP requirement guides, templates available online. We've developed one that we think is terrific. We'd love for you to buy, to utilize it, buy us, but certainly don't start with a blank sheet of paper. There's plenty that are reasonable that you can get with a quick Google search. What you want to do is make sure that you look at your current package and what it can do, as well as any custom software that you've developed, especially formats of key reports, anything that you're using Excel and Access for that maybe is plugging holes that your current systems don't offer. Look for ways where email is being used to synchronize and sync people in a flow. That's a great way. It tends to be create a lot of duplicate data entry that goes unrecognized. But look at how email is being used, not to send emails out, but when people are tapping one another on the shoulder to take the next step. It's a classic example of where workflow management can help. Also, look, we still see logbooks on the shipping and receiving dock. And while we say here, include the basics, spend some time focusing on what makes you unique, which is often hard to tell. It's hard to see the forest for the trees, but sometimes outsiders or new employees can explain what's unique. One of the questions we frequently get, so I'm going to ask this on everyone's behalf, is should we redesign our processes and develop future state process maps as part of the requirements gathering, or should we do this later during the implementation process? And our answer, being typical consultants, is it depends. The answer is yes, you should do this. The question is one of when and practicality. But we're big fans of doing process mapping, be they linear like these, or be they swim lane multi-channel diagrams. Ideally, if time permits and if budget permits, and time is a hard thing to get these days, we would say do your process definitions, especially for those core business processes that might be in need of improvement before you pick your software. Map the current state, map the future state in theory, perhaps using a best practice, and then use that best practice or leading practice map to distill the requirements from the software requirements tell you what, this tells you, the maps tell you how. What we will tell you is that in practice, what we tend to see is companies defining requirements without regard to the process first, because it's more expedient and more practical, and then do the process maps as part of the implementation. It's a little riskier, but in today's environment where people are already taxed pretty heavily, and we run into companies that need software ASAP, this approach works well enough and tends to be more conservative with dollars. These are the type of examples that we have come up with clients. This is direct from an example with a client. Their formula or package change they are a maker of pet food. And this is a client invoicing process. I believe this is a current state, and just showing the linear process and number of steps that one single person goes through to from the time of post shipment to the time of generating invoices and getting them off to customers. So it's sneaky how many steps can go to something as simple as the word invoicing. So what I thought I'd show you, are there any questions at this point?
No.
Okay. Thought I'd go back to this, but I mentioned that online you can get templates of requirements building tools. That's what we have created here in this ERP Navigator. And while it's called ERP, we do that for mouse clicks and things like that. We certainly do cover subject matter like field service systems, customer relationship management systems. In fact, I'll switch over to another client where CRM was very important. So if CRM is something in your desires for new, here we included marketing and Salesforce management in the scope for this client. And so we have embedded things like, how do you manage opportunities inside your CRM? Do you have a sales opportunity methodology? Do you want views of your opportunity pipeline? Do you want to convert an opportunity into a quotation? But being a distributor, things like production scheduling and estimating aren't quite as important. But this company happens to have purchased a couple small job shops. They're a couple of their suppliers of precision machined parts. And you'll notice in their case, CRM wasn't as important. But when we get over to quoting and estimating, we get into things like, can I create an estimate for a new product, something that hasn't been defined before? Can I estimate multiple quantities so that if I'm making more, the cost will go down because I'm amortizing the setup? Can I send out RFQs for tooling and other fixed costs from within the estimate and then amortize those fixed costs across the parts? Oftentimes we will get asked to re-estimate something. Do I want to have revision control over my estimating function? This is where we would plug in the weights. High, medium, low, 3, 2, 1, whatever's appropriate for you. We've landed on verbiage of strategically important, required, and nice to have. Another one that we find a lot of interest in, especially in our machine shop clients like this, is scheduling. Do I want to be maintaining my schedule in grid format, in Gantt chart format, in a calendar format? Do I want to do backward infinite scheduling, forward infinite scheduling, backward finite, forward finite, or a little bit of each, both of them together? So these are rather than starting from a blank sheet of paper, these are questions that we seed and plant in the minds of the potential users and talk to them about. In some cases, you can just hand out sheets to everybody in each department and say, tell us what you want. Other clients say, shoot, we've never done this before. We'd like to have an expert opinion, someone who's not trying to sell us software, but someone who can help us understand what would be the benefits and costs of doing things like having overlapping operations scheduled, or using group technology to minimize setups in the scheduling sequencing. So we've certainly built things like scheduling, classic MRP in there. Your routings, how do we store our routings at the header and detail level? So a lot of things to cover what I would presume it being NWIRC clients would be in manufacturing. We certainly can't forget quality. You've got the transactional elements like incoming inspection or incoming quality control, in-process quality control, even outbound quality control. So there's, do I need a pre-shipment quality check? This client thought that would be just a nice to have. So the key thing there are to make sure that you survey in some degree of detail all of those areas that are going to be in scope: purchasing, receiving, inventory, and shipping, commonly required of manufacturing entities, sales orders, quoting, and estimating. In this case, and we haven't done this yet, but they decided just yesterday to change the scope and add preventative and predictive maintenance into the scope of things. But their service management is very minimal. They're not warranting their product. They're not tracking service cases. They don't have a help desk, and they don't do field service. So service ended up being a very light scope. And of course, as with every other client that we work with, cost accounting, payables, receivables. So those, but in every case, you want to talk about, we can't forget accounting. And in this case, we've seeded our question set to potential buyers of software. Do you need recurring payables, for example? So it's an arduous process, and it's no fun. It's probably even less fun than going to the dentist, but it's better to know what you want before you buy than to learn and have buyer's remorse that the software doesn't do something that you need after you've committed to it. So once you've got the goals defined, the high-level scope defined, the detailed requirements defined, then you can begin the effort to identify candidates and their capabilities. Certainly, the internet can be your friend. I will say this, that those that pay for Google ads, and you can certainly, there's advertising dollars that gets them to the top of Google searches. So you don't want to just go through page one. You certainly want to research companies' websites. One of our clients went to a research website and ended up being characterized by the website as a process manufacturer when it turned out they're a retailer who happens to mix up some chemicals not too dissimilar from Home Depot or Lowe's or True Value, where they mix up and tint your paint on site. So you want to be careful that the AI that these research sites use is well schooled. We think that better than these two are talking to your customers, your suppliers, and if you can get any intel on your competitors, those are great sources of information. We're working with a powdered metal molder over in the St. Mary's area, and despite the fact that there's a lot of competition among the powdered metal molders over there, we've seen some cooperation in terms of sharing information about their ERP experiences. And certainly trade shows and trade magazines, not so much the software ones, but if you're in the capital equipment manufacturing world, if you make machine tools or if you make cabinetry or whatever, you will find enterprise software vendors who do well in those industries attending them. And so it's a good place to go through. Certainly the MEP network, Magnet in Cleveland, NWIRC in Northwest Pennsylvania, Fastlane down in the Dayton, Cincinnati area have been great resources for a number of our clients. Of course, there are consulting and advisory firms that help with this. We jokingly refer to us, or our practice, as technology dating service. And then there are some online databases that you can subscribe to on the web. If you're going to utilize a consulting firm, just a couple of cautionary tales, and admittedly, it's a bit of a commercial message for our services. Make sure that they're independent and that they're not taking commissions or wedded, secretly wedded to another software vendor. One way to do that is to ask them for a list of their past 20 or 30 projects and find out, did they spread the wealth? In other words, were one or two vendors winning all of their deals, which might be just a coincidence, or have they arranged marriages with their clients and software vendors across the board and spread things out? Find out if their focus is limited to just a few, and if they're going to be, in effect, shoehorning you into one of the 5 they know. Or are there any other biases? And then find out if they've led similar projects related to your industry, company size, the system you're coming off of, for example. What we decided to do years ago, and this is the latest iteration of our research, is very simply to, I'm looking here at clients, but for all of those questions that we asked clients of importance, we've got a number of ERP, CRM, and other types of vendors in our database. Some that might be commonly known to you. There's, starting at the top, Acumatica or Adian ProShop. Epicor is a fairly well-known one. Some that are, things like Fishbowl, that's a bolt-on to QuickBooks, or Global Shop, all the way down to some of the ones that we've probably never heard of, like Microsoft or Oracle. But these folks are all in our database. And if I select, say, Microsoft, notice this is now a define answers. And we were, the last one we were on was defining recurring payables. So we've noticed here that for Dynamics 365 Business Central, yes, they do offer that. They don't require a customization or a bolt-on product, no modification or a partner product. And we have verified that through our research. And if I look at other products like their bigger ERP system, Dynamics Finance and Operations, they also do recurring payables, but we haven't yet verified that in an audit of their profile as of 2021.2, which was late last year. So because we've got 15 years worth of research and across about 90 products, one of that little group of 3 machine shops that we're working with, what we'll do, and we'll be starting the research with them sometime soon. I pre-selected a handful of products here just to run it a little bit quicker. But I can say, take those 20 or so that we've selected from the tier 2 and tier 3 group and rank and score them for me, and give me some ideas on whether we're looking at 85% fit, where I might have to go bigger, or are they scoring 90% plus, where we've got a good group and a good scoring to work with here. And I can see just my top 10, and some of these may be familiar to you, others maybe not so much. We've learned that just for our own rubric, that 85% and above is where typically our clients will buy. So I see I've already got 10 that are above that minimum threshold we set. And so this would be the group that I would then work with the client to start researching, looking at more detailed reports like the technology details, which will show are there any issues or concerns related to their technology platform. So with our approach, we've already solicited the answers from the vendors. If you go with more of a do-it-yourself and with a question set, so for example, these folks much prefer, or they said they're open to an on-premise or a remotely hosted deployment model. And what we see is that 8 of them give you the option, but 2 of them don't offer that on-premise. So that might be a tiebreaker that says we want options that might knock Rootstock and NetSuite out as candidates for this particular client. And then the functionality, which I'm not going to run, that report takes quite a while because it tends to be about a 50-pager, but it will get down to, does it solve their scheduling needs? Does it solve their quoting needs, their estimating needs, their sales order processing needs, all of those. In the interest of time, I'm not going to run that one and have you watch the folders fly back and forth. But that's the type of approach you can get with using a consultant or an online database. But either way, we recommend that you want to go out and get answers to your requirements. Make the software vendor put it in writing, so to speak, before you spend your valuable time looking at their product. Certainly another thing that you want to do, if you can, we recommend doing it before you spend your team's time looking at software, is identify the step 5, which is the total cost of ownership. These, historically up until about 2015, I would say 100%, maybe 90, were doing on-premise or maybe having a third party host it, but they would own the software. And so you had infrastructure costs, you had, you have to consider user devices like handhelds, specialty hardware in an on-premise, or if you just have a third party host it, you have to buy the licenses, but you'll have fairly low, typically 15 to 20% of the license cost as your annual support. You certainly have the one-time non-recurring implementation costs. Then there are those upgrade costs, and these are never included in the cost when you buy the software. And they're often hidden costs that can hit you every 2 to 5 years. And there's certainly something that we recommend budgeting for. And certainly if you go on premise, don't forget to budget higher internal staffing costs. Even if it's a part-time task for the controller or someone in a small company, it's a taxing job to keep the server babysat. More since about the 2015 era, we've seen more and more interest in the software as a service, otherwise known as the cloud model, where the infrastructure costs and therefore the monitoring costs tend to be much lower or negligible. But the cloud doesn't get rid of our handheld costs, our printer costs, but we do avoid that upfront nut from software costs, which does make it more like a leasing of a car than buying of a car. It's not a perfect analogy, but certainly if for clients of ours that are cash strapped, for ones that are maybe owned by a PE firm who might be selling out in 3 to 5 years, the software as a service model tends to fit very well because you're paying a higher annual cost, but if you're only doing it for 3 to 5 years, not as a PE firm might be in for it, it's not as big a concern. The implementation costs tend to be the same for the on-premise or hosted model versus a software as a service, other than maybe some activation fees that don't come up. The thing to look for that is one of those options, or sometimes optional, sometimes included, and there's no standard for it, is in a software as a service model, are those upgrades included? Typically, we find they are, which is really nice. In other words, the upgrade just comes and it applies itself, or they apply it for you. But you want to make sure that's what you're getting in your annual subscription. So our observation on costs, folks like us who are experienced can help provide you with some estimates, but generally speaking, you need to send out a formal RFP to get hard numbers. You want to force the software publishers and resellers into a comparable scope. A lot of these software guys are trained to not sell the add-ons that you need, but sell them to you later, kind of upsell you after they've made the initial sale. You want to be alert for that. Certainly, generally speaking, we would expect the costs to be very similar within a market tier. Epicor and Infor are going to have similar costs. ShopTech and JobBoss are going to have similar costs. QuickBooks and Peachtree are going to have similar costs. But when you start comparing a small car with a mid-size sedan and a half-ton truck, that's when you will start to see different costs. Counterintuitively, we recommend avoiding more than 2 demonstrations and avoiding interactions and negotiations that are hostile. Remember, this is not just a vendor that you can switch on easily, like your corrugated vendor or your bar stock vendor or a fastener vendor. You can always switch from Grainger to Fastenal, but your software vendor is a long-term commitment. And so we have found that these strategies often increase your purchase costs. So we would just recommend have a well-orchestrated buy process with a committed date. And when you do that, you'll get better pricing and better commitment of the sales team from your software vendor. We find that timing can save 3 to 5%. So it's not the end of the world, but quarter ends, a lot of these companies are very fiscally driven and will give some extra quarter end discounts, certainly some year end. If you go with a brand name, you're going to pay a little bit of a premium. Microsoft commands a pricing power. My Solutions, MIE or Bazawi out of Pittsburgh tends not to have the same brand name recognition and therefore not the same pricing power. So we find that costs are very useful when picking your semifinalists, but when you get down to the final 2 or 3, usually we'll find them to be comparable. We find that due diligence from a presentation or a demo standpoint is very important. And we've identified 6 types of demos, all of which have their place, but kind of like any sort of a pharmaceutical, you want to make sure that you use it when the right prescription for the right ailment. A lot of all of the software vendors will offer what we call overview demos. And these aren't bad up front, just to get yourself acquainted with what's out there, to see flow, to see what modules are available. If you're running an old character-based system and you want to see what a modern web-based user interface looks like in ERP, an overview demo is great. The caution I would tell you is these are what we would call a mile wide and an inch deep. Don't expect an overview to answer too many questions about depth of functionality. They all work, they work flawlessly, and they look wonderful. And for that purpose, you don't want to buy software based on an overview demo. It's just too cursory. We are big fans of other than maybe doing an overview to see flow and user interface, we're big fans of what we call high jump demos. And that is the first or second time you interact with a software seller, give them a list of 10 to 30 critical business issues that have been challenges to your current systems, that any outsiders or internally you've discovered or believe will be challenges to a software provider. Any software provider from QuickBooks to SAP and all of those in between can take a supplier invoice and pay a bill. That's not a good example of a high jump. That's a low hurdle. The high jumps will be things like, show me how I do a cost estimate for a new part that uses a new raw material and neither of them exist in my part master, and that I can add one on the fly. Things like that. Show me how you do finite scheduling in my machines and infinite scheduling in my assembly area. Those kind of things, all in the same software. Once you get through those are very good at weeding out the pretenders and weeding out the software salesmen who say yes to everything, but then can't show it. After that, we're fans of doing what we call day in the life presentation, where you do focus on flow and look for that detailed fit and buy-in from and acceptance from all of the users. So something like the more mundane functions, processing of supplier invoices. Absolutely, you want to see in a day in the life, not something you typically want to see in the high jump demo. If technology is something that you put a lot of value on, and maybe half our clients do, we suggest having a separate technology review where it is limited to the IT staff. Maybe you're getting the IT buy-in. These are very important where there might be future integrations to build in, where there's a technology strategy component to the purchase. If you're simply buying for functionality, spend an hour or two in your day in the life on the technology platform and you'll be good enough. In some occasions, it's a minority, but we have orchestrated what we call proof of concept workshops. And that has been anywhere from 3 to 5 days and paid for, meaning we're not having the software company's salespeople come in, but we actually have their consultants come in and configure the system and go through a proof of concept or prototyping model. This can be expensive. It's time consuming. We recommend this only when there's some complexity that warrants this level of detail. And then certainly expert opinion is a way to validate decisions. Sometimes companies will learn about us well into their process, but they'll still ask us to come in and kind of do a sanity check for them. So that's another due diligence approach. Once you've gotten down to a perceived vendor of choice and kind of that winner, to validate that, we suggest learning about other companies' experiences. We have a client down in southwestern PA right now who is talking to 2 software companies' references, and they're actually going to visit a couple of them. We recommend also visiting the vendor and their headquarters, or if it's a reseller, a value-added reseller, getting to know those people that will be supporting you. The salespeople are going to disappear. It's those implementers and the folks on the phone that you're going to want to get to know, because that's who's going to keep you afloat. And even there, we recommend make sure that you interview the consultants that are assigned to your project. As we said earlier on, this is the biggest IT expenditure that most manufacturing companies take on. And if you don't gel personality-wise with the consultants assigned, or if you find that they don't have the industry expertise or experience that you feel is important for your success, you can and should ask the software provider to assign someone else. So that's, those are 6 steps that get you to starting of an implementation in a purchase contract. When it comes to implementation, we get asked this a lot, and this is somewhat of a repeat from Tuesday's webinar, but there is a conflict between time to benefit and the time allotted. A lot of companies will say, wow, we'd like to be live in 3 months on our new system because we don't like our old one, but that would require so many hours of people's time that they can't fit it all into those 3 months and do their day jobs, if you will. So that's partly why these projects do end up taking 6, 9, occasionally 12 months, because the amount of time that companies have, internal people have available to do some of the wood chopping is cramped by their day jobs. For that reason, we often see phased implementations rather than an all-in. Maybe they'll phase in modules, especially if you're working in a disintegrated environment today where you've got QuickBooks for accounting and something else for CRM and something else for production planning and scheduling. Those are great environments to phase in a product rather than going all in cold turkey. We don't tend to see departmental implementations, but we do often see we'll bring up one location and then another if they're currently on different systems, because bringing one up on a new system just has them still on 2 different systems. It's very important to know what you'd like, but certainly compare that with your software vendors' approaches, and maybe ask them to give you some data or talk to other companies that have been successful with that approach. Most implementations of enterprise software today will be a combo approach with some resources from the software vendor, but still you doing a lot of it yourself. The days of a big group with 3-piece suits coming in are pretty well past us. It's important to have a well-architected and detailed out project plan and budget. If they don't give you one within the first few weeks, you know that you've got someone who's not really set up to manage your project effectively. You also want to be within the first day or 2 of an implementation, see the change management process. Very important we're not fans of having implementations done to you, but we'd prefer to see them done with you, which means educating they learn about how your business, and then you learn about how the software works generically. Beware of people who come in and start talking about data conversion or system setup first or customizations, simulate the system and find ways to use it generically and vanilla out of the box. And then out of that, you can define any needs for data conversion, customizations, special reports, operating, and always want to develop your job aids and your operating procedures. And then once you've gotten through that design and close the design door, then you can move into the true execution, which is address rehearsal, training of the end users, the masses. This is with a small group. This is with everyone. Then you initialize the production database and then go live. This is a very tried and true and effective process. And if they're promoting something else, I'd at least raise my eyebrows. So, in conclusion, as we hit the top, getting close to the top of the hour, I'd be remiss if I didn't suggest to everyone, if you're embarking on a new enterprise software evaluation, ERP, CRM, production scheduling, CMMS, maintenance management, look for funding. There's a lot of funding out there. The MEP centers have been offering COVID relief in other programs. In Pennsylvania, there's the MATAC, the Mid-Atlantic Trade Assessment Adjustment Center. If there's anyone that's in Ohio, we've got the GLTAC, which covers Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana, is their sister organization. And if you've been impacted even minimally by foreign trade, there's monies available. And we've had numerous clients get some funding for an enterprise software initiative from the MATAC and the GLTAC. Again, if there's any from Ohio on the line, I'm familiar with the Small Business Development Center and Ohio Tech Cred, and I'm sure Molly and the team at the IRC could alert you to any others. But there's plenty of money available these days if you know where to look and are aggressive with it. That's probably the most important slide from anyone's perspective. But my recommended takeaways: set up those software and business strategies first. It doesn't have to be. It's not a big IT strategy project. It's a day exercise, half a day if you're a really small company, which includes setting up some of those goals. Why would we invest in a new ERP system or a new CRM system vis-a-vis a new CNC mill or new tooling or what have you, or a new mold? There must be something that's driving you for those office efficiencies or those shop floor data collection efficiencies. From that gives you those guiding principles and rails or guide rails to help you define your requirements. Do the on-paper comparison of capabilities. A number of ways to go about that. We've built a database that helps with that, but there's certainly plenty of ways in a lot of companies that do a good job on their own. Get some cost information, and especially look at how they license their software. Is it named user, concurrent user, or some other formula? Because you will find there can be differences that are material based on their licensing scheme. Then once you've got those kind of information, then you can verify the fit. The on-paper analysis tells us theoretically how they fit. You get yeses and nos and things like that. The demos help you with what we call the degree of yes. How clean is it? How smooth is it? Or how cumbersome is it? And certainly references and workshops can add to that beyond the demo. And then when you're done with that and you've selected a vendor of choice, then you can negotiate the price and contract and then implement in alignment with your strategies and goals. Don't throw away that requirements document. The first meeting with your chosen software vendor is generally going to be something they call a BPR, business process review. And they're going to ask you a lot of the questions that a good consulting firm or a good template asks you in a requirements building document. Hand it to them before they come in, meet with those, hand it to those consultants, and then say, okay, now you know what our costing method is. You know what we want in terms of blanket sales orders or blanket purchase orders. You know what we need and don't need. Let's talk about the differences. And that will save you a day of consulting time at least. So last commercial message, as Molly said, Meaden Moore is a firm headquartered in Cleveland. We have an office in Meadville. It's a CPA firm, mostly branded, but we have a consulting division that I run. Over 100 years old with over 250 employees. We help, our group limits our assistance to manufacturers, distributors, and industrial service firms. And we were ranked between number 6 and number 10 as the most influential ERP firm east of the Mississippi recently by Oracle. So I thought that was pretty good, except I put a dollar sign in instead of a number sign. But anyway, thank you for that. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you.
Great, thank you, Scott. We do not have any questions at the moment, but we'll give everyone a chance to plug a question
Great.
in if they have one. In the meantime, while we're waiting, just want to thank you, Scott, for this information, sharing all of this with everyone. Thank everyone for joining. You can check out other offerings from NWIRC by going to our website, nwirc.org. And I don't see any questions coming in. So if we somehow miss you, please reach out to myself or Scott with your questions and we'll be sure to get them answered. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, and if anything comes up, just connect with Molly and she'll hunt me down.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.